AM 1460 WXBR, the new WXBR. Thank you much for joining us back on the program. Mike Paiva and Peter Zimbor with you this morning. Joining us on the phone right now is Bob Holly. Bob was a mainstay in the WWE for over 15 years. He has captured several titles in his long career, including a multiple-time tag team champion and a 6-time hardcore champion. He is author of the book, The Hardcore Truth, and he joined us by phone this morning. Bob, thank you for joining us on the program. With so many wrestling-related books on the market, what led you to write The Hardcore Truth?
Hey, Mike. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on your show, and thank you for giving me a platform to get my story out there. It just kind of, it was just an idea, a brief idea that I had, and just telling stories and stuff about, you're just in conversation, and then you start talking about stories that happen on the road or what happens backstage, and my wife said, "Why don't you write a book?" And I thought about it, and I'm like, I've been a mid-card guy, most of my career, and it's like, who's going to read a book from Bob Holly? Who's going to be interested in that? Mm-hmm. And the more I got to thinking about it, I decided to pursue the idea a little bit more, and so I called ECW Press to see if they could help me out as far as writing it, and they said the best thing for me to do is find somebody that I know that can write. And so that kind of shot that idea out the window. And then I got to talking to a friend of mine over in England, Ross Williams, and threw the idea past him about, why I want to write a book, but I just don't know who I can get to do it. And he's like, "Why don't you give me a try? Let me have a crack at it." And so I'm like, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Yeah." And so I got back in touch with ECW Press, and I talked to them, and they said, "Well, have him give us a sample of what he can do." So actually, the very first part of the book he wrote in, the part where him and I had wrestled together, that was the story he sent ECW Press.
Okay.
And from that moment on, they wanted to go forward with it because they loved what he wrote and thought that was, just a really good read what he had wrote. And so, they sent us the contracts and everything, and off we were. And the project took about 18 months to complete it. It was a lot of work, a lot more than I thought it was going to be.
What has the response been from your peers? We had Jimmy Corderas on the program just a couple of weeks ago to promote his book, The 3 Count, My Life in Stripes as a WWE Referee. He said you two swapped books with each other early on. Have you had any response from any other guys about the book?
I've had a few people read it, and they've, peers of mine, and they really like it a lot. They really, really enjoyed it. Tom Pritchard, he said it was one of the best, well-written wrestling books that he's ever read. And then just, a lot of the media's read it and stuff like that and reviewed it. And so far I've been very fortunate to have good reviews. And, because I wanted to, I didn't want to hold back and, it wasn't an axe to grind or anything like that. It's just, my life on the road, the politics that I dealt with, my opinion on a lot of things, and that's what it was. If there was somebody that I don't like, there's a lot of positive that I say about that person in the book also, so I feel like I've been pretty fair, to most people in the book. But as far as my peers and stuff, that I've been very fortunate. Everybody's liked it so far.
Bob, let's go back to the beginning. Were you a fan of professional wrestling as a kid, and who were your favorites to watch?
Oh, gosh. Actually, it's funny because when I was in Oregon, because I grew up in Oregon as a kid, and I used to watch big-time wrestling. And, and I actually talk about this in the book, too. And it's funny because Pat Patterson, growing up as a kid, he was one of my favorites to watch because he was out of Sacramento, a show called Big Time Wrestling, and Pat Patterson, Pepper Gomez, Bob Roop, and so forth, and Peter Maivia, he was there, and then they had Portland Wrestling, which I watched, and Playboy Buddy Rose. They had Dutch Savage, Jimmy Snuka, Roddy Piper, Jesse Ventura was there. The Bushwhackers were there, but they were as the Royal Kangaroos. so I watched all these guys, and actually Buddy Rose, he was my inspiration to become a wrestler because I just thought he was the greatest, you know, and he was really good. He was, and I always wanted to aspire to be like him, of course, but you know, that's impossible because there's only one Buddy Rose, but he was a talented guy, and that's where, you know, that's ever since I watched that, ever since I was a kid, actually, I wanted to become a professional wrestler.
How did you eventually get involved in the wrestling business?
Actually, I ended up, you know, getting in touch with the right people because I had moved from Oregon to Alabama, and because I wanted to get into wrestling, and so there was a wrestling school in Pensacola, Florida, and so I ended up going there, and you know, of course, meeting a lot of people, and you know, and I talk about this in my book, how everything evolved from when I was a kid in wrestling, and you know, getting to Alabama and starting and everything. But I actually started out in Pensacola, Florida.
When you first got into WWE, which was still WWF at the time, you were brought in as a race car driver named Thurman Sparky Plug. People might not know that you actually raced cars in real life. Was it hard to portray that character at all?
You know what? It really was, believe it or not, because as a race car driver, you know, because they wanted me to be this happy-go-lucky guy that had no, you know, just smiling and carrying, you know, smiling and being happy all the time and this and that. And that's, you know, that wasn't me because you just, you know, as a race car driver, you have a lot of ups and downs. And, you know, depending on how your race car is running that night, that dictates your mood. You know, if your car's running good, you're going to be in a good mood. If your car's not handling well or running well, of course, you're going to be in a bad mood because you want to run well, you know, and you're trying to figure it out. But, yeah, it was tough, you know, and because I had actually went to Vince and asked him if I could change my name, you know, and so we ended up dropping the Thurman and just kept the Sparky Plug, you know, and then eventually ended up dropping that, thank God, because it was just, you know, I wasn't comfortable playing that character, and you could see it. The fans can see it when a person's out there. You know, if you're not comfortable being somebody in the ring, you're just not going to give 100%.
Right.
And that, you know, and that was really tough for me, you know, because it was more like a cartoon character, you know, because back then everything was kind of like a cartoon character, and then as everything evolved, you know, you know, your gimmick was sort of a reflection of your personality, which made it a lot easier, you know, to portray a character. So, you know, it just, but to answer your question, yeah, that was not, you know, I had fun, but then it was tough at the same time.
What was it like meeting Vince for the first time? Was he as larger than life as everyone says he is?
You know what? I just, you know, because they had flown me up to Connecticut for a meeting with him and J.J. Dillon. And, you know, when I walked in, I just, you know, it was just, I mean, it was a big deal meeting him, but it wasn't, you know, I wasn't like, oh my God, it's Vince McMahon, you know, it was just like, okay, this hopefully potentially could be my boss, you know, so, but yeah, you know, it was neat meeting him. Heck yeah, it was.
You ended up debuting at the Royal Rumble, I believe, because of an injury from the 1-2-3 Kid instead of debuting on television. Was that cool for you to debut at the Rumble on pay-per-view?
Oh yeah, it was. It was totally unexpected too, and you know, I was a nervous wreck, of course, because my first outing was in front of 20,000 people, you know, and they had played a few vignettes, so you know, people kind of knew a little bit of who I was and stuff like that. But yeah, it was you know, pretty exciting. You know, your first match is a pay-per-view, you know, and it was fun, but I was nervous as hell. That's for damn sure.
I bet. In 1995, you briefly held the tag team titles with the 1-2-3 Kid. What was it like winning gold for the first time?
That was actually like a dream come true, so to speak, because your whole goal when you get into WWE, WWF at the time is to become a world champion, to go as far as you can, to work on top. And you know, and as soon as I got those titles, I was in disbelief that, you know, it's like, is this really happening to me? You know, that I'm potentially on my way to bigger and better things, and it was almost surreal. And then, of course, the next night we ended up losing the tag titles to the Smoking Guns on Monday Night Raw. But, it was for that 24-hour period, it was pretty exciting. I was I was on top of the world at that point, but it was pretty exciting.
Again, we're chatting with Bob Holly, author of The Hardcore Truth. After a stint with the Job Squad, you were kind of floundering in WWE until the Hardcore title was introduced. Who came up with the nickname Hardcore for your name, and did you feel more comfortable in this role, of course, compared to Sparky Plug?
Actually, Vince is the one that came up with the name Hardcore, and I was a lot more comfortable playing that character because it was more of a serious character. It wasn't a goofy name or anything like this. It was a name that people could take seriously, and then when they started the Hardcore division, I felt right at home in there because my type of wrestling, I'm a very physical guy. I've always been physical all my life in anything I do. And that Hardcore division fit me to a T because of the physicality of the matches, and the brutality. And I've always been, very rough. Even as a kid growing up, everything I did was, very rough. And I played hard, and so that gimmick fit me perfect. And I think people misunderstood me a little bit because of the gimmick, because I was so rough. But that was just, my nature in the ring. And, and I expected it back, too. Whoever I wrestled, I didn't expect them to hold back by no means. I wanted them to be just as rough with me.
Right.
Because that's the way I liked it, And so that the Hardcore name fit. I thought it fit pretty good. And I was perfectly content and happy with it.
Around 19... I'm sorry, go ahead.
They're a lot better than Sparky Plug, that's for sure.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But, I mean, even though, and I tell this to a lot of people, too, and it's like, that was my start, and back then, if WWE is going to give you a name, you darn sure ain't going to tell them no.
Exactly.
Especially if that's where your goal is to get in WWE, and so it was a name that I just accepted and took it and thought, well, maybe down the road sometime I'll be able to change my name. Of course, I was able to, fortunately, but a lot of people, they do make fun of the gimmick, which I don't blame them because I make fun of it too. But it was a start for me, and people should understand that because I guarantee if they threw a name out there like that at them, they darn sure wouldn't tell WWE, oh, no, I think I'm going to go do something else. So I just hope people understand that's just part of the business and part of, the growing pains of the business is name changes sometimes here and there to try to better yourself. And I was fortunate enough to be able to better myself and get a better name, so, and it worked out good for me.
You were then paired with your storyline cousin in Crash Holly. What was it like working with Crash at that time?
Oh, he was a nutball. The guy was funny. He kept me entertained. He did. Because he would do stuff. You wouldn't even know. Like, we'd talk about stuff that we're going to do, and he'd just do something totally different, off the cuff. And he was funny. He made me laugh. And a lot of times I'd cover up or where people couldn't see me laugh. And a lot of times I was laughing under my breath. And so he was funny. I enjoyed being around him. He was really fun to work with, but he had his ups and downs and stuff like that, and it reflected in his work sometimes. And so, I hated that they ended up letting him go, but I thought, because I had told him plenty of times, because he was very vocal about a lot of things. And so, and I'd tell him a lot of times, just keep your mouth shut, just don't say a word. And it was really hard for him. And so unfortunately they ended up letting him go, but I just thought he was a blast to be around. He was funny.
In 2002, you faced Brock Lesnar for the WWE title at the Royal Rumble after returning from a broken neck. What was the recovery and training like to be able to come back from such an injury?
It took me I was out for 13 months. Probably the first 4 months, 5 months, I couldn't work out, and I lost a lot of weight. Of course, because I wasn't eating right, and being injured, you can't really do anything. So, but it's funny because muscle has memory, so it actually didn't take me long to get back to where I was. I didn't have the wind that I needed when I came back, because in the ring, that's a totally different type of cardio that you get, and so the only way to get good air, good wind, so to speak, is to be in the ring. So that was a little hard at first when I came back, but it was like riding a bicycle. It came back pretty quick after being in the ring a few times. But my training was good, my diet was good, and like I said, after 13 months, I was ready to come back. Doctors didn't think I'd be ready in 13 months at all. Because they were thinking it was going to be about 16 months before I was even going to be able to get back in the ring, and I did it in 13 months.
Wow.
And so the doctors were really surprised. And I had no issues either, because they had sent me to Louisville back then when they had their training camp at OVW, and I got in the ring the first day, and I was bumping and bouncing around like nothing's even happened to me. And actually, Johnny Laurinaitis was going to send me home because I was being too aggressive too soon, on my body, taking all these bumps and bouncing around and stuff like that. And I told him, okay, I'll back off a little bit. And so I did, and they left me there. But, and I was able to knock the ring rust off there. But, that's just, I always try to push the envelope. If I get injured, I always, start way before I'm even supposed to, trying to get ready to come back. And sometimes that's not a good thing.
Bob, you were a trainer for MTV's Tough Enough, and there was an incident where some say that you roughed up one of the contestants, Matt Cappotelli. What are your thoughts on that incident?
Well, you know what? The thing is, first of all, that would have never been an issue if he wouldn't have went on TV and literally cried like a child and contemplated on quitting wrestling because he had a black eye and a bloody lip.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't knock any of his teeth out. I didn't break his nose. I didn't break his jaw. He didn't lose an eye. All I did was gave him a black eye and a bloody lip. But the problem with that was how that didn't, because he was in the corner and I kept trying to tell him to sit still, but he kept flipping and flopping and moving around, and he was like a moving target. And I kept telling him sit still, and he kept trying to get up. And so that's how the black eye and the bloody nose or the bloody lip or whatever ended up happening. But, I tell people all the time, I can't tell you how many times I've had a black eye and bloody lip from one of the guys wrestling him. That's going to happen in wrestling. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when it's going to happen. Now, if so I don't think I don't think you've even ever seen a grown man go on TV and that happened to him, and they're not sure if they want to continue wrestling. He was the only one that's ever done that in the history of the business, go on TV and cry about because he got a black eye or he was roughed up a little bit. But I can't tell you how many times I've been roughed up in a match. I mean, that's just the way it is, and if it wouldn't have been me, it would have been somebody else down the line, and it might have happened on TV or whatever, or would have happened on TV. And then what's he going to do? Go in the back and complain because somebody was too rough with him?
Right.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times Bradshaw's just about knocked me out from kicking me in the head or punching me, and same thing with Jericho and a lot of these guys that I've wrestled that wrestle rough, so it's, the jury's out 50-50 that I was too rough with him or I wasn't, and that's just part of wrestling, and that is just part of wrestling, and he understands that now. He understood it, and I just don't think he realized how rough wrestling, is when you get where you're at. And so he's never experienced anything like that. So I think he was just caught off guard. It was a shock to him. And, I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't black his eye on purpose or bloody his lip, by no means. But the bottom line is I didn't injure the guy. I didn't cost him a day of work or anything like that. And he, I've never known anybody to go on TV and cry because they got a black eye and wanted to quit. I was almost embarrassed for him when he did that, as I'm sure a lot of people felt the same way. But then a lot of people too said I was too aggressive. But that's wrestling, and I don't have any regrets about what happened. But like I said, it would have never been an issue if he wouldn't have got on TV and acted the way he did about it. But it is what it is, and he understands, he gets it. We've talked about it and stuff like that. So, it became a bigger deal than it really should have been.
We're chatting with Bob Holly, author of The Hardcore Truth. In 2009, Bob, you became tag team champions again, this time with Cody Rhodes. What was it like working with Cody at that point in your career?
Oh, I enjoyed working with him. And they put me with him to help teach him, because he was fairly new. And I enjoyed working with him. He was always, he always listened. He always did what I, suggested. I never told him what to do. I just made suggestions to him and what to change and stuff like that. But, and it's like I got to thinking his dad is Dusty Rhodes. Who am I to be telling him, how to do something? Because, his dad taught him an awful lot. So I really didn't have to really teach him that much, because his dad is, has one of the greatest minds for the business, and was one of the biggest stars in the wrestling business. So Cody was, three-quarters already there as far as, knowing the ins and outs and what to do and stuff like that. And I think they just put him with me just to, polish him up a little bit. But he didn't need any polishing up because he was already good, So, and as far as his career now, I think he's got a great career ahead of him. And I'm happy for him because he really does. He does good. And I enjoy, and I enjoy watching him. So, and I think he's a better heel than he is a babyface. And I hope he stays a heel, So, but I think, like I said, I always enjoyed working with him.
Bob, before I let you go this morning, I want to play a little word association. I'll give you a name. You give me the first thing that comes to mind, okay?
All right.
Let's start with Triple H.
No comment.
JBL.
Physical.
The Undertaker.
Respect.
Jim Cornette.
Respect.
Randy Orton.
Great.
Paul Heyman.
He's another great one.
Jim Ross.
Probably the best announcer there is.
And finally, we'll end with Vince McMahon.
Let's see. He has the word I'm looking for. It's He's one hell of an entrepreneur. Great mind. He was a good boss. That word I'm looking for, I can't think of it. But anyway, he made wrestling what it is today.
Bob, where can folks get a hold of the book, and where can fans see Bob Holly next? You recently took part in a TNA One Night Only event. Any chance that we can see you on our TVs again on a more permanent basis anytime soon?
Never say never, but right now I'm not looking to do anything really. I'm not looking to come back to TV or anything. I'm enjoying, right now I'm enjoying no schedule, doing my own thing, getting up every morning, just wondering, okay, what am I going to do today? But you never know. Like I said, I did, like you said, I did that thing for TNA, the One Night Only, and I did that as a favor for Al Snow. And, but but I'm supposed to be going to England at the end of the year, actually, and do some stuff over there for Preston City Wrestling, and then I'm going to Australia right after that for a week and doing some stuff down there. And but you can get my book at Amazon.com. It's on Kindle. You can get it at Books A Million, Barnes & Noble. I believe Walmart's carrying it now. Let's see. But and also you can follow me at the Bob Holly on Twitter. And I try to answer every one of my Twitter followers that sends me a question or ask me anything they want. And but that's one thing I always try to do is answer all my Twitter followers. I'll take time in the morning, and that's usually when I'll answer the questions and stuff like that. Is usually in the morning. But anyway, that's where everybody can find me at the Bob Holly. So that's pretty much it. So and. You never know. I mean, I still do wrestling. I like doing wrestling seminars and stuff like that, too. So I actually enjoy doing that more than I like wrestling anyway. But anyway, hopefully, one day soon we might see me somewhere.
Very cool. Maybe we can get you up in the Boston area sometime to do a seminar. That'd be great.
Absolutely. I would love to do that. Yeah, sure.
The name of the book is The Hardcore Truth. Bob Holly, I want to thank you very much for joining us and taking time out of your morning for joining us on the program. Hopefully we can have you on in a later fashion to talk about wrestling, more current variety.
Heck yeah, I would love to. And thank you very much, too. I really appreciate you guys letting me have this time on your show. And I'm very grateful for that, and thank you.
Thank you very much. This is the Metro South Morning Show. PM in the AM. We'll be back right after this. Stay tuned.